But for how long have I named the Prime Minister and the Labor leader for many years before that each way Albo? Because so often he'll say one thing one day, mean another day, and there's no greater example than each way Albo was the person who had certain standards in opposition that have been flushed down the toot as soon as he became the Prime Minister. Let's go back to 2021 for the first example of the each way tonight. Do you reckon Scott Morrison has been to a petrol station recently? Petrol prices are surging on his watch. That was back when unleaded was $1.79. $1.79 if you have the E10 stuff as well. $1.96 the sky was falling in when that was normal unleaded. Well, now petrol prices around the country way above $2, $2.30 in some parts of the country. But the Prime Minister, who of course was so outraged back then, does nothing about petrol taxes today, despite the fact that he has the gall to campaign in Queensland as part of their upcoming, Tasmania as part of their state election, talking about action on cost of living. The action, of course, when it comes to fuel prices is not cutting them. The action from this government has been to increase petrol prices. It was 23 cents when he came to power, but each way Albo has now pushed it up to 49 cents in the dollar. Now, of course, the Prime Minister does this because petrol prices literally don't matter to him. As a person who's been a politician for an awfully long time, a staffer before that, but certainly as the Prime Minister, he's in the bubble inside the bubble inside the bubble inside the bubble. It is the bubble of one. In this case, the car is called C1. That is the Prime Ministerial limousine, where, of course, and understandably, the Prime Minister is not pulling over to the side of the road because it's a little cheaper at this station than that station. He ain't filling up petrol. Something that, of course, he was more than willing to have a go at when he wasn't the Prime Minister. So either he was disingenuous back then or he doesn't care now. Either way, not great looks. But other people in a position to cut petrol taxes rather than increase them, of course, Grim Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, who's always popping up somewhere, flying here, there and everywhere. And yeah, I know, it's part of the job. But do you think he cares that you're paying 49 cents in the dollar, 49 cents in the litre, I should say, for petrol taxes? No. Because we had a look at his expenses forms today. Now, we have no information for 2023. The system is so ridiculous that they haven't updated that. But here's the latest. For the last 6 months of 2022, the bloke who apparently was doing something about cost of living, well, he didn't have to worry too much about it for himself because you were paying for it. His scheduled commercial transport, which of course means flying around domestically in Australia, almost $36,000. The amount of money he was allowed to spend on living away from home, be it for Parliament, speeches or anything else, $23,000. And this, by the way, is for 6 months. 6 months, not 12, 6 months. We paid $7,148 for his personal plated car. The extreme amount of that is the fuel card that you and I pay for. So even when an MP or a minister or a treasurer is putting petrol in their own car, they're not paying a cent. We are. And this bloke is so tidy with the public purse that he even claimed $1,000 in parking. So are you surprised the guy who does not pay for petrol does not notice when the prices go up because it's just how much and tell us the kilometres? That's it. The company car is paid for by us. The flights where he goes around the country telling us that he really cares about cost of living, despite the fact that, of course, he took $1,500 off 10 million workers, despite the fact that his tax cuts were $14 for people in Dunkley, $15 for people on $45,000 or $120 a month if you happen to be earning over $100 and something thousand, please. And is there another reason why? So if the Prime Minister isn't noticing, he's not going to cut the taxes, and the bloke who counts the taxes isn't going to notice the taxes because we're paying for everything to do with his car. What about the Assistant Treasurer? What about Stephen Jones? Now, you've heard a bit about him today because, of course, he lives in the southern part of, well, not the southern part of New South Wales, but sort of in and around that Illawarra area, Wollongong, all that kind of area. And he decides to claim car trips between there, where he gets chauffeur-driven down to Canberra. Because obviously for him, do you turn left and go to Canberra, do you turn right and go to the airport? Either way, you pay $43,000. And again, these details are not from this year, they go back into 2022. for anyone who's been living under a rock. Mr Jones charges taxpayers for a private plated vehicle, including his fuel allowance. However, on at least 3 occasions, he used government-issued cars for the 2.5-hour journey between Shell Harbour and Parliament House. Now, remember, we already pay for him to drive the car that is given to him as an MP, but then we pay on top of that car for the one that he wants to sit in the back of. And it's not because the mobile phone magically works. Anyone who's driven between Sydney and Canberra knows there's about an hour of it, regardless of whether you're on Telstra, Vodafone or anything else. It doesn't work for about an hour. So I'm not entirely sure what the reason was. If he wants to come out and say he was sleeping, maybe that could be it. Sorry, you saw me with the glasses. 3 trips were part of $43,000 Comcar bills that he racked up between April and December 2022, which of course were Labor's first 7 months in government. In the same year, he also claimed more than $11,000 in the personal vehicle. So are you surprised that the Prime Minister, who's driven around for free, the Treasurer, who even claims the parking tickets on the car that we already pay for, hasn't done anything about petrol tax? Well, are you surprised that the bloke who was advising the bloke, who works for the bloke, who is not paying for his petrol, is not doing anything to cut petrol taxes? Here he is, Stephen Jones, explaining why that's a good idea.
As much as we'd like to, we can't. It's about a $6 billion hit to the budget, and the budget is already well in debt. We've got $1 trillion worth of debt that we've got to service, and the cost of that is now costing us more than we pay for medicines. It'll be costing about as much as we pay for Medicare sometime towards the end of next year. So the costs are significant. So a tax cut is basically a hit to the budget as well, and we just simply can't afford to be doing that at the moment.
That was before, of course, they posted a $20 billion surplus. So as we've told you how many times, about $3 billion, $6 billion, $8 billion to cut petrol taxes, they could afford it. They just wanted the biggest surplus possible so they could rub it in politically. At the same time as he was making those comments on radio, he was charging taxpayers for the limo ride between his electorate and Canberra. Now, many people in politics have been around for a long time, including Stephen Jones. And you see, Stephen Jones has got form on fighting for those of us that would like to cut petrol taxes. In fact, I can go right back into the Wayback Machine of the internet and find this one from 2014, when petrol taxes went up via indexation under the Abbott government. Local families are already struggling to make ends meet with the cost of living because this government's unfair budget, the last thing they need is to pay more tax every time they fill up the car. Stephen Jones cracking at the Liberals for having a petrol tax rate that's lower than the one that he and his mates have chimed in at 49 cents per litre. This is a sneaky move by the Abbott government, trying to get through the back door what they couldn't get through the front door. Couldn't say better myself, Stephen. But of course, he was talking about then, not now. The each-way elbow disease is one that is often caught by governments, but is absolutely dead on point when it comes to this one. The Assistant Treasurer, the Prime Minister, all of these people that were willing to say, hey, have a look at petrol taxes, cut petrol taxes, cut petrol taxes, and then eventually, of course, they were cut. But then the chance they had to keep them lower, they stuck with it. Despite the fact they had $20 billion more than they needed in spending. 6 months later, any plan to change petrol taxes for the back half of 2023? None at all. What about the start of 2024? In fact, we'll put them up. And this is the minister who, again, if nothing else, adheres to the talking points, because this was his excuse as to why, under his watch, while he's putting the budget together with the Treasurer and the Prime Minister, about why you needed to lose that $1,500 in a guaranteed tax return from a couple of years ago, and when they ripped it out of people's bank accounts, and they did so in July of last year. This was what Stephen Jones said then.
It's important that we are ensuring through sound economic management that we don't make the inflation problem worse.
So each way elbow doesn't just apply to the boss. It applies to the deputy boss and the deputy boss and the deputy, everyone on that side of the aisle. Put simply, cut petrol tax. Cut petrol tax. Now, a little more on cost of living, because I've got a lot of information for you on this tonight, including some pretty sobering reading, which has come from the people that are dealing with people who are truly at their wits' end. Now, cost of living, regardless of what you talk about, it all costs more, despite the fact that they want to say, well, yeah, it costs more, but it doesn't cost as much as it did a year ago. Come on. It all costs more since this mob came to power. And we are learning today via a bunch of business and government people, including Jim Chalmers, who no doubt, of course, paid his own way to get to the Financial Review Business Summit today, that inflation and interest rates are set to go higher than go backwards. Remember, the best case scenario that the Reserve Bank put on the table is even if they start to cut things, they won't do it till 2025, 2026, and even then it'll be 75% of the extra amount that you've had to pay since this bloke and his treasurer and his assistant treasurer and all the other people backing them in came to power. And specifically on housing, there's a group of people who need to be recognised about the financial difficulties that they're in right now. It's not the majority of the population, but it's people who are in a financial bind at the moment, no matter how hard they work or what job they do. Because we learned today that pressures are growing particularly on people who are now starting to have real problems when it comes to actually paying for their mortgages at the moment. Now, interestingly, there was a group called Suicide Prevention Australia. They put out a report today about the number of people that have been reaching out to people like Lifeline and a whole bunch of other organisations to talk about how to handle the emotional stress of the current cost of living situation. The regular survey, which was released on Monday, showed that half of those that were surveyed were distressed through the March quarter, that meaning right up until today. A 4% increase on December, so things getting worse for people when it comes to paying things off, not better. That's 12 points worse than it was this time last year. So guess what? The Prime Minister might stand in a lectern saying action on cost of living. Reality is that it is getting worse and worse and worse. And meantime, the particular group of people who I was mentioning before that are feeling a specific squeeze are the ones who have been most targeted by this government. The ones who were told, you've got too much, you pay your fair share in tax, but you are not allowed your fair share in tax cuts. These are the people with personal or household incomes of over $150,000, as described as the big losers of the tax changes which took place a little bit earlier this year. Now, meantime, and interesting to note, yes, there was a collection of tariffs that have been removed from things like toothbrushes and tampons. They're called nuisance tariffs, but as even the crazy cat lady would say from Tasmania, please, this doesn't really touch the sides.
What are you going to save, what, 10 or 20 cents? Seriously, mate, that they better come up with better offers than this rubbish that they're coming up with to give people a cost of living out there just a little bit more room to move. This is just tipping around the edges of it, and it's not good enough.
Well, a broken clock is right twice a day as well. She's absolutely right on that.